Hey, everybody. It's Sam Jacobs and Asad Zaman. This is Top Line Spotlight. You know Top Line Spotlight. It's that short segment where we interview an operating executive, a CEO, a founder on a problem or a challenge that they've solved in the last 12 to 18 to 24 months. And today we've got Anna Talerico. She is the CEO of Corporate Finance Institute, CFI, which is a credible company focused on training people on how to do corporate finance, as you can imagine. Many people at Pavilion have taken CFI courses. And fun fact, CFI is a sister or sibling portfolio company of Pavilion in the Elephant Ventures portfolio. Anna, welcome to our show.
This episode of Top Line Spotlight is brought to you by Chargebee's Beelieve conference. Come learn from a lineup of impressive speakers and leaders across 2 continents. The event will be held in San Francisco on April 8th and 9th, and in London on May 8th. With the code Pavilion, you can access your ticket for a 100% discount. Yes, you heard that correctly. Your ticket is free. Use the link in the show notes to get your complimentary ticket today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been listening since you guys launched it. I'm a big fan of short format podcasts. So I've been listening and following along since the beginning of the year, and I love it. Thanks.
Thanks for that. We appreciate your support. Give us a little, so I gave a little bit of background, but give us your background professionally, and then also tell us a little bit about CFI.
Sure. So I was a bootstrap founder and did that for a long time. I actually founded a company with my husband and one of our best friends, which was very unusual. And we ran that company. We ended up having an exit. And I was a very proud bootstrapper. I always need to say that because now I'm an operating partner at a venture fund, but very, very proud bootstrapper. And after the exit, after the company was acquired, I was doing some advisory work that our investment bank had plugged me into, and ended up joining a venture-backed company as a COO. And our venture partner was Arthur Ventures. So it was my first time operating in a venture-backed company. It was totally different than what I thought. We ran it like a bootstrap company. They were a great partner, like there when we needed them, never prescriptive or in the business when we didn't need them. Had a couple of incredible, crazy years, had a crazy, great exit, rapid growth. And then after the acquisition of that company, Arthur Ventures came a-calling and said, hey, why don't you come be an operating partner for us? I always say they had me at hello. Mm-hmm. I love working with startups and I love working with founders. I love working with hard founders. I just love it all. So I just jumped at the chance and I did that for a few years. And I did a lot of fractional and interim roles as the operating partner. I should say I'm still an operating partner. Arthur Ventures is my forever home. But the CEO of CFI asked me to come be his interim COO. So I worked in the company here at CFI for about 6 months as an interim COO, working with the founder. And I think through that process, he just decided that he wanted to step down. So I had been working with the company. I had placed a couple of executives from my network in the company, knew the team, love online training and background. I just feel very passionate about the space. We had recently acquired a software company. I'm big on B2B software. So I just felt like kind of a perfect storm. So I joined CFI as CEO about 3 years ago. And that's probably it in a nutshell.
And tell us a little bit about the journey of CFI. So you mentioned the acquisition, but what was the company like when you joined? And I think that speaks to the challenge that we're going to talk about, which is the operational rigor that you had to instill in the course of, I don't know if it was turning it around because I think it was doing well, but making it do better, so to speak.
Yeah, it was doing well, and it was a profitable company with lots of great metrics. But I knew that it could do better, and that's what I was really there to do. So when I joined, we had an incredible team. It's one of the reasons that I joined. I just loved everybody that was there, and I was excited about some of the recent executives that had joined, and we had acquired a software product that is adjacent, right? So CFI, online training, as you mentioned, I'm so glad to hear Pavilion has used it, but it's an incredible product market fit. Mostly for consumers. Like we have a great B2B business, but it was founded as a consumer business. That is the biggest part of our business. And then we acquired a software product about a year before I joined that sells into finance and corporate finance. So logical, just kind of like, do you want fries with that hamburger? And we hadn't really done much with the software, though. It still ran just the way we had, acquired it. There had been no integration yet or anything like that. So when I joined, I said, we've got two great products and really, I would say a fantastic team, but in some functions, very unprofessionalized. So rather than really focus on like merging the two companies together and running them as one company, I decided I needed to professionalize go-to-market on both teams first, because, to think about training up sales reps, right, on one product, and now you're going to sell them, actually, you're going to sell these two products, and they're slightly different buyers, and there's it just felt like both were such great brands and needed separate go-to-market teams while we professionalized. So, but it was a great company, and it just, I think that it was, we had half our staff in Canada, half in the US. So there was some complexity, right? The company had been founded to be in office in Vancouver. So we had a very passionate, Vancouver staff, but they weren't coming into the office. And then we had gone remote before I joined. So there were certainly like cultural challenges. And one of the biggest challenges I found was the operating cadence, right? So if you think about something like online training, it is, the best online training companies run with operational velocity, but you don't actually have to, because you create a course and then you're selling it, right? And it's selling, perhaps evergreen. And so it doesn't necessarily demand operational rigor to have a great online training company. Now, B2B software is different, especially at the stage that our software product, Macabicus, was. It was very, lots of product market fit, but small. And it was like, I just saw this opportunity to massively accelerate growth over there. So I think we had operational, executional velocity for our software product, but it was a super small team. So there was complexity around the first go-to-market team over there. And on the CFI side, it was, I just found the pace to be different than what I was normally used to in startups. And it took me a couple of years to really figure out how to solve it, I will say.
That's so interesting. How do you think about operational rigor? The importance of it is obviously to get everybody aligned and move towards a particular goal at a certain pace. But when you think about why it was absolutely necessary to implement it, and then how do you go about explaining that need to the team and designing what that process of establishing this rigor would look like? How do you work through these various questions along the way?
Such a great question. I think that in every startup I've worked in, whether it was fractional or, in full roles or as a founder, I found that it was easy to create executional velocity. Either it was already there when I joined as I was doing something fractional, or it was easy to kind of come in and pick up the pace with the team and help them execute with more velocity. And the company I founded, it was just inherent in our fabric. So I will say it was a little bit of an existential crisis for me personally, because I always thought I was great at this. I thought if you had asked me before I joined CFI, what are some of your strengths? I'd be like, getting everybody in the boat really quickly, rowing as fast as we can, to our destination and our mission. And I just thought, well, that's something I'm really good at. And then I landed but I never thought well, why am I good at that? Right. Or why do I think I'm good at that? So I landed at CFI and I just couldn't. I thought I'll come in and I'll tell everybody where we're going and I'll get everybody aligned behind our mission and vision, and we'll create a lot of rigor around our metrics and our operating system. I run a really tight operating system in terms of when I communicate, what I communicate, what we inspect, just how the whole company works. I like it to be very systematized. So I thought a lot of the executional velocity that I'd had in other companies came from my operating system. But I put my operating system in at CFI and it didn't. I just didn't. And I thought, well, this is okay. I'm going to lead by example. I'm going to set the pace. And, some of the executives on the team are going to set the pace and we'll just show everybody what this looks like. And it still didn't stick. Mm-hmm. And, so I felt like a lot of fits and starts and soul searching of what's going on. I've got this operating system and I would tweak it and, just even how I communicated and what I'd communicate. And I'd talk a lot about it. and there'd be a lot of nodding heads and alignment and understanding, but then it just wasn't showing. And it was across the board in every function. So let me pause there because I'll tell you how I ended up solving it. But it wasn't like I didn't have an idea until the light bulb went off, I will say.
That is so interesting because in organizations, if you establish it from the get-go, that's a different sort of problem than when you come in and you have to then establish it after years of people doing things a certain way and habits forming. And those habits having led to some sort of success as well, right? Like you smoke and you know it's going to kill you. That's a habit you know you should quit. But if the habits made you a lot of money, that's a harder habit to break, I find.
Where'd you develop your operating system, Anna? I just want to, like, how did you do? Is it an EOS thing? Is it a proprietary thing? Is it like you have a Google Doc where you're just like, this is how I run a company?
Yeah, I do have a Google Doc of how I run a company because sometimes founders ask me and I like to share it, but it's evolved over time. It's really evolved from reading books like EOS or reading, there's, the 4 discipline, like the discipline of execution. There's the book Execution, which I love that book. Even like, I think is Frank, the guy that was the Snowflake CEO, he wrote a book AMP. I love that book. So I'm always reading about these things, and over time, I just would adapt it into something that I felt worked. And it does have to be adapted depending on the company, but there's a scaffolding there.
Awesome. All right. So go ahead, Asad. I interrupted you.
The pillars of an operating system. Now, after having gone through all of these experiences, how do you view an operating system today?
Mm-hmm. Great question. Let me just backtrack to one thing you said, which was, it's different when you step into somebody else's culture. It's different, a culture is a living, breathing thing that's not just made up by the leader. It's made up of all of the shared experiences and people there and how they came to be there and why they came to be there. That's probably, I could do 25 podcasts on all of that and the mistakes and like the new perspective I have on those things. So it was a good call out of, but I still, like as an operating partner, I often go in and I'm able to, I was able to ignite that. But it is different when you're stepping in the seat and you're not a visitor or you're not a founder. So I think about the pillars of an operating system as our rituals, right? And that can be at a team level. I want every team to have an operating system that kind of works within the company or operating system. But as the company operating system is our rituals of what we communicate, how we communicate, when we communicate, and what formats we communicate, so that staff knows like they're going to hear from me every 2 weeks about these topics, and sometimes there might be other topics, but like they know they're going to hear from me about these things, and that we're going to meet once a month, and we're going to cover these things in the town hall. And it's not like the agenda is like so rigid that you don't adapt it, but they know at least once a month we're going to show up together and cover certain topics. So there's certainly this whole kind of how we communicate and when and in what forms. And then beyond that, there's then a sort of like the rigor around the metrics. I'm a very, very metrics driven leader. And so, getting together, whether it's monthly to inspect certain metrics, whether it's quarterly, we do like a weekly, we do every quarter, we do a week-long QBR for the whole company. Every department minimizes the meetings internally and externally and does at the start of a quarter a QBR on the past quarter. And I want to talk about that. But anyway, I think about it's like, then for me, the next level is this metrics inspection of like, we have teams that will do it weekly. We have some teams, if we're building like a sales, arm that's a new team, they're doing it daily. But I think that has a big part of it. And in my experience, traditionally, that's been enough, right? So this communication structure, this kind of metrics driven, how we're doing that. And then I usually codify something that's like how we work. And it's usually a 2 or 3 page document that's like, this is how we're going to work together. These are our norms. And that talks a lot about, working with velocity, working with finding the fastest point from A to B. Right? I think in startups, it's really easy to lose that, and you find that I hear this all the time. So it's no longer when you're a tiny team, you're going from A to B so fast, right? But then as you add different people with different experience, and the team gets bigger, you find that people naturally can introduce a lot of complexity, and that slows down the organization. So a lot of the operating system is also just about reinforcing constantly the norms. How do we make decisions? Like, what framework are we going to use? Because I want to constantly ferret out the complexity that we as humans are always bringing to our work. Like, it's just, you have to fight against that.
To cut the fat every couple of years, because like processes, they just like multiply, and then you have to sit down and be like, okay, this is useless, let's take this out.
They don't even just multiply, because sometimes they drift away, and sometimes there's things that you thought were part of the code base. You were like, you have it written in how we work, and then you figure out that we're not actually working like that, and you're like, WTF? I thought we said that we did this. Why aren't we doing it? So how did you? Give us the punchline? Is it? I don't want to steal your thunder. Tell us how you solved this problem.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the macro level, but to your point too, Sam, of just like sometimes you think something's really codified and then you might take your eye off it and then suddenly it's different, it's drifted. I think that how I solved some of those where I just got super close to, I got into that, quote unquote founder mode. Like when we stood up our podcast last year, I ran it. I did the first, 50 podcasts myself to say like, look, you use these tools, you can do a podcast this fast, so that I could constantly come back a year later when I knew the podcast process would be bloated and say, no, remember, this is how we do it. So I do think sometimes it's important to I'm a big believer in getting your hands really dirty. So that's part of it. And then, macro level, what I ended up doing a year ago in January is I said, I was just at my wit's end. Like nothing I was doing was working. And I was so unhappy with our velocity. And I said, we're going to do company-wide sprints, because every department was doing sprints and I was aligned with what they were doing, but somehow still we felt stuck in the mud. And I even felt like the cross-functional collaboration and communication between the departments wasn't quite dialed in. So we've been running sprints for a year. Everybody in the company loves it. It's worked really well. It's a very lightweight process, but it allows us to make sure that we don't go adrift and that we are very, very aligned on this very tight focus of things that we're going to do. So once a month, we get together as a leadership team. We plan the sprint. It's about an hour all through the month or the quarter or the year where we have a backlog, right? So we have this backlog of all these things we might want to do or ideas we want to explore. That's kind of like an annual backlog or even just like a forever backlog. And then we do like half H1 backlog, and we kind of are constantly pulling the backlog into H1 or H2, and then we break it down. We've got a Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 backlog. So it's kind of all there. We just dump it. So we don't stop mid-month to say like, oh, I think we need to go do this thing, or mid-quarter even. We just dump it into the backlog. Then we kind of groom it. Every quarter we've got the plan, and then every month we break it down and we say, these are the things we're going to get done this month. And obviously, if you're going to work on something that's multiple months, this is the part of what I'm going to work on this quarter. But no business as usual makes it onto the board. It's got to be a body of work. And usually that means, if it's a body of work, it's usually inherently cross-functional. So the leadership gets together. Ideally, they're working with their teams before that, so the team is aware and the team can be advocating for like, hey, I think we really need to accelerate this or do this. Leadership gets together, they make the monthly sprint. There should be no surprises because we've already got the quarter mapped out and the half. And then they keep a sprint board. They do like a traditional sprint board and move things through. And then they don't have to meet now through the month because they do async updates, right? So they're updating the sprint board. And there's dates that they make sure to come in to say it's on track, off track, or why. There's this process of, if it's blocked or whatever. So that's really nice that it can be async now that it's like a muscle for us. And then they do, and at the end of the month, we do a sort of a debrief on what went wrong, what got blocked, where did we get off track. And then again, we start the process again. And when we do that, it's just the leadership at that moment and some key stakeholders, but we record the sprint. So anybody in the company could watch if they wanted to. And then we also send out a narrative, and the board is public. So anybody can also go look. So at any time, what we're working on. But then I would say one other piece of it of staying focused is everything that we work on, I literally mean everything, has to map to one or more of these strategic pillars that we have. So we have sort of 4 strategic pillars. And nobody at CFI should be working on anything that is not mapped to one of those strategic pillars. So that's one way I've been able to help make sure that that we are not going adrift. And then the sprint process is the other way to make sure. And then because what will happen is if you put something in the sprint, let's say we're all aligned, but you're then talking about it as a team and you're like, this is sounding way more complicated than what I thought, or why is this taking so long? You have that moment to say like, wait, how are we doing this again? Like, how are we approaching it? So you get to ferret out a lot of the adrift or the complication
I'm listening to you. And the good news, personally, of course, it's all personal, right? Everything in the world is about me. I don't know if you knew that, Anna, but it's all about me.
I did. I understand. Me too.
And I feel like we were much tighter a couple years ago, and then our head of people left, and she was sort of running this, and now we're a little bit looser. The pieces are there, they're in the field, and we can come back. And our version of a sprint is initiatives, and to your point, they're cross-functional. They have to be project-based because they require so much interdisciplinary work. But my question to you is this: did you need to hire to run this role, or meaning you could imagine that you might need a chief of staff or a COO. Now, on the other hand, you're an operational person. So maybe you're the COO. But for me, I'm a sloppy person most of the time. And so I'm listening to this thinking, we have all of the pieces in place to do this. We're so close. But maybe I need a chief of staff. And Carly used to be chief of staff, and now she's head of member experience. And maybe I do need to call that person that emailed me, because I feel like I need the field marshal. I need someone to drill sergeant to run this thing.
Absolutely. You need a drill sergeant and somebody who's very rigorous and very clear, right? Somebody who does not operate in gray, because people will introduce gray into the process and it will go adrift. So I personally ran it for about 6 months because I felt, again, I had to lead by example. I had to work out the kinks even, right? I wanted to be the person responsible for working out the kinks so I could keep everybody understanding like this, we are doing this. And then once we had it all dialed in and it was really working efficiently, my COO took over and took over to the, like, sometimes I'm not even in these meetings anymore. Like I will check the board or I'll watch the video, but if you're not that kind of CEO, you have to have somebody running it because it's work. It's work to keep everybody corralled. It's work to make sure that people are doing their updates, so they're mapped into the strategic things. And it's work to keep people from going adrift. It's like our human nature to go adrift if we're not constantly reminded and pulled back, or to overcomplicate things. We just overcomplicate things. I think in a high-performing organization, leaders are constantly ferreting that out. You have to.
How long does it take to go from here's what we're going to do and start implementing it to it's now becomes second nature in the organization? Like it actually becomes the thing. I feel like every organization has a beat to it. Kind of there's a musicality to a business, and this establishes that. How long before that beat starts sounding good and starts becoming second nature?
Yeah, I think for anything, not just something like this, I think it typically takes 3 to 6 months. It takes a little bit longer than you think, right? If I come into an organization, I'm like, here's how we work, and this is when you're going to hear from me, and how we're going to meet, and how we're going to communicate with each other. That's in a few months. People are like, oh yeah, she really does email us every 15th, even if it's a Saturday. People kind of understand that. But something as big as like, we're going to bring all these people together to do this sprint, and we're actually going to be held accountable to it, right? And we're actually going to have to say in front of our peers why something didn't get done. Like those things take a little longer because people have to understand you're serious. I mean, I think as leaders and startups, we're figuring it out a lot of times, right? It's new, there's something going on, or we haven't done it as leaders before. And I think a lot of these things get started and then dropped. They get dusty and they require, constant. So I think it takes 6 months to go, oh yeah, they're serious. They're not dropping this.
Yeah. And the other thing that happens is people say they're going to do stuff and you stop asking about it. And you're like, so how'd that thing go? They're like, well, I actually didn't do it. Like, what do you mean you didn't do it? I thought it was running. They're like, no.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty. That's such a good example of the monthly sprint and what it prevents from happening. Yeah.
Anna, this has been fantastic. And I am going to ask you for that Google Doc. But before we go, we want you mentioned a couple books. What are some ideas, content, books, besides Top Line, of course, that you think, that have inspired you, informed you, that you want to pay it forward with, that you want us to know about? You mentioned execution, but what are some others?
Yeah, execution's a great one, and the AMP from Frank from Snowflake's a great one for sure. I'm at this phase. I don't do a lot of business book reading anymore, and I'm in this the era of chemicals and processed food reading. So I'm reading a book right now called Brain Energy, and I keep telling everybody about it. It's like one of the most impactful books I've read in years, just around food and mental health and the impact of that. I read, ultra processed people a couple months before that. That's my chapter right now.
Are you a big,
But
a big plastics person? You're big like, hey, don't, we've got credit cards running through us kind of deal?
yes, I'm a big plastics person, but more so the food supply, just in general. I've got to say the processed food and the industrial food complex worries me.
Fair enough. Brain energy.
Yeah.
What's one tip? Like, what should we stop doing, start doing? Just because I'm interested.
Well, sugar, it's going to kill you more so than anything else. I think, just processed food and sugar it's high. It's pretty impactful, not in such a positive way. Don't come for me, sugar industry, but
Fair enough.
yeah.
If folks want to reach out to you and get in touch, maybe they're inspired by what you said. Are you open to people contacting you? What's the best way?
Yeah, definitely. LinkedIn's always the easiest way because I will pay attention there. And if somebody sends me a message, I will respond there for sure.
Awesome. Anna, thanks so much for joining us on Top Line Spotlight. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much, guys. See you later.